Ancient Rome, a mighty empire stretching from the shores of Britannia to the deserts of Egypt, from the mountains of Germania to the Mediterranean coast. This was a realm where invincible legions, powerful emperors, and grand structures like the Colosseum shaped the course of human history. But beneath the surface of this glory lurked a silent terror that brought even the greatest empire to its knees. It wasn't an enemy army, nor a civil war, but the invisible scourge of plague's devastating forces, capable of wiping out millions, shaking the very foundations of Rome. Throughout the nearly 1,000-year history of the Roman Empire, plagues like the Antonine Plague, the Plague of Cyprian, and countless smaller outbreaks left scars that never healed. Each day, Romans lived in fear. Would today be the day they or their loved ones succumb to an unexplained fever? How could an empire as powerful as Rome become so helpless against these unseen enemies? And how did these plagues forever change the course of Roman history? Today, we step into one of the darkest chapters of ancient Roman history, where disease didn't just claim lives, it tested the resilience of an entire empire. This is the story of Plagues of Rome, the empire's greatest fear. To truly grasp the catastrophic impact of plagues on Rome, we must first journey back to the empire's zenith, the 2nd century AD, during the reign of Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor whose wisdom and leadership earned him a revered place in history. At this time, Rome stood as the undisputed center of the world, a sprawling empire that stretched across 3 continents. The city of Rome itself was a marvel, home to over 1 million people, an unprecedented figure for the ancient world. Its streets buzzed with life. Merchants hawked their wares in the Forum, senators debated in the Curia, and children played in the shadow of grand temples dedicated to Jupiter and Mars. The empire's infrastructure was a testament to Roman ingenuity. Roads like the Via Appia and Via Flaminia, meticulously paved with stone, spanned thousands of miles, linking Rome to distant provinces like Britannia, Gaul, and Egypt. These roads facilitated the swift movement of legions, ensuring the empire's military dominance, while also enabling the flow of goods and ideas. Aqueducts, towering feats of engineering, brought fresh water from distant mountains to the city, feeding public baths, ornate fountains, and even private households of the elite. Rome was a metropolis unlike any other, a beacon of civilization where the Pax Romanae peace promised stability and prosperity. Yet, beneath this veneer of grandeur lay vulnerabilities that would prove deadly. Rome's population density, while a sign of its success, made it a perfect breeding ground for disease. The city's poorer districts, such as the Suburra, were a labyrinth of narrow, overcrowded streets, where entire families lived in cramped, poorly ventilated tenements known as insulae. Sanitation was a constant problem. Waste was often dumped directly into the streets, and the Tiber River, which ran through the heart of the city, became a cesspool of filth. Rats and insects thrived in these conditions, unknowingly carrying pathogens that could spark an outbreak at any moment. Even the wealthier neighborhoods on the Palatine Hill, with their marble villas and lush gardens, were not immune. As servants and slaves moved freely between the slums and the elite residences, potentially spreading disease. The empire's vast trade networks, another pillar of its prosperity, also sowed the seeds of its downfall. The Silk Road connected Rome to the far reaches of Asia, bringing silk from China, spices from India, and precious gems from Persia. Meanwhile, ships sailed across the Mediterranean, linking ports like Ostia, Alexandria, and Carthage, ferrying grain, olive oil, and exotic goods. But these same trade routes carried more than just wealth. They brought deadly pathogens from regions as far away as China and sub-Saharan Africa. The Romans, unaware of the microscopic dangers, welcomed these ships with open arms, not realizing that a single infected sailor could unleash a calamity. Roman medicine, despite its advancements, was ill-equipped to handle such threats. Physicians like Galen, who served under Marcus Aurelius, made significant contributions to medical knowledge. Galen's studies of anatomy, based on dissections of animals like pigs and monkeys, provided insights into the human body, and his writings influenced medicine for centuries. But his understanding of disease was rooted in the ancient theory of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Illness, he believed, resulted from an imbalance of these fluids, and treatments often involved bloodletting, purging, or herbal remedies like garlic, honey, and willow bark. While some of these methods provided relief, they were useless against infectious diseases. The Romans had no concept of germs, viruses, or bacteria, and their reliance on superstitions such as prayers to Asclepius, the god of healing, offered little protection. A chilling story recorded by the historian Dio Cassius underscores the fragility of this era. Publius, a prosperous merchant from Ostia, made his fortune trading silk along the Silk Road. He often boasted to his friends about the riches he'd earned from his journeys to the east. But in 165 AD, shortly after returning from a trip, Publius fell gravely ill. A high fever gripped him, followed by violent vomiting, and within a week, he was dead. His family, devastated, had no idea that Publius had brought back more than silk. He'd carried a deadly pathogen from the east, a harbinger of the disaster that would soon engulf the empire. In the year 165 AD, a nightmare descended upon Rome, a calamity that history would later name the Antonine Plague, often referred to as the Plague of Galen. Modern scholars believe this outbreak was likely the first recorded emergence of smallpox or measles in the Roman world, a deadly gift brought from China via the Silk Road. The plague's origins can be traced to the Roman legions stationed in the east, who had just returned from a grueling campaign against the Parthian Empire in Mesopotamia. These soldiers brought back spoils of war, but they also carried an unseen enemy far more dangerous than any Parthian army, a pathogen that would unleash unprecedented devastation across the empire. The Antonine Plague spread with terrifying speed. It began in the military camps of Syria, where soldiers first reported high fevers and strange rashes. From there, it swept through the bustling port city of Alexandria, a hub of trade and culture, before reaching the heart of the empire, Rome itself. The historian Dio Cassius recorded that at the height of the outbreak, as many as 20 people perished daily in Rome alone. Entire neighborhoods were transformed into ghost towns, their streets eerily silent save for the cries of the bereaved. Galen, the renowned physician who witnessed the plague firsthand, described its symptoms in chilling detail: a burning fever that consumed the body, vomiting that left victims weak and dehydrated, diarrhea that drained their strength, and a rash of red spots that soon turned into oozing sores. For many, death came within days, while those who survived often bore permanent scars or lost their sight, cruel reminder of the plague's wrath. Imagine yourself as a Roman citizen during this terrifying time. One morning, you hear whispers in the marketplace that your neighbor Gaius, a strong and healthy blacksmith, has fallen ill. Within 3 days, he is dead, his body covered in sores. The next day, his young daughter begins coughing uncontrollably, her small frame trembling with fever. Fear grips your community like a vice. No one understands the cause, and no one knows how to stop it. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some blame a curse from the gods, angered by the empire's hubris. Others whisper that the Parthians poisoned the water supplies as an act of vengeance. In the absence of scientific knowledge, fear and superstition reign supreme, deepening the chaos. The story of a Roman mother named Flavia, preserved in fragmented records from the time, offers a heartbreaking glimpse into the personal toll of the plague. Flavia lived in the crowded Subura district with her 3 children, a boy and 2 girls, all under the age of 10. When the plague reached their neighborhood, Flavia watched in horror as her children fell ill one by one. First, her eldest son developed a fever, his skin erupting in red spots that soon turned to pus-filled sores. Flavia tried everything she knew, burning herbs to purify the air, offering prayers to Apollo, the god of healing, and even paying a local healer to bleed the boy in an attempt to balance his humors. But nothing worked. Within days, her son was dead. Before Flavia could even grieve, her 2 daughters succumbed to the same fate, their small bodies too weak to fight the disease. Overcome with despair, Flavia refused to leave her home, clutching her children's belongings as if they could bring them back. A week later, she too fell ill, her cries echoing through the empty tenement, until she too passed into silence. Flavia's tragedy was not unique, was a scene repeated in countless households across the empire, as the Antonine Plague tore families apart with ruthless efficiency. The plague's impact extended far beyond individual suffering, striking at the very core of Roman society. The Roman army, the backbone of the empire's power, was decimated. Entire legions lost up to a third of their soldiers, leaving the empire vulnerable to attacks from Germanic tribes along the northern frontiers. The economy, already strained by the costs of war, spiraled into chaos. Labor shortages crippled agriculture and trade, as fields lay fallow and merchant ships remained docked, their crews too afraid to sail. Prices for basic goods like grain and oil soared, plunging the poor into deeper misery, while the elite hoarded resources in a desperate bid for survival. Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic emperor who ruled during this crisis, found himself grappling with an enemy unlike any he had faced before. Known for his philosophical writings and meditations, Marcus sought to lead by example, remaining in Rome even as the plague raged around him. He ordered empire-wide purification rituals, hoping to appease the gods, and poured resources into supporting the afflicted, distributing food and medicine to the poor. In a desperate bid to replenish the depleted legions, he even recruited gladiators and freed slaves, offering them citizenship in exchange for military service. Yet, despite his efforts, the plague continued its relentless march, claiming lives without discrimination. Some historians believe that Marcus Aurelius himself fell victim to the disease in 180 AD, dying in Vindobona, modern-day Vienna, while campaigning against the Germanic tribes. His death marked the end of an era, as the Pax Romana began to crumble under the weight of the plague's aftermath. The Antonine Plague, which raged for nearly 2 decades, left an indelible mark on the Roman Empire. It is estimated to have killed between 5 and 10 million people, or only 10% of the empire's population. But its true cost went beyond the death toll. The plague exposed the fragility of Rome's interconnected world, where the same roads and trade routes that fueled its prosperity also became pathways for destruction. As the empire reeled from this first wave of devastation, little did the Romans know that another, even deadlier plague awaited them in the centuries to come. Nearly a century after the Antonine Plague had ravaged the Roman Empire, a new catastrophe emerged, plunging the already weakened empire into another abyss of despair. This outbreak, which began around 250 AD during the reign of Emperor Decius, became known as the Plague of Cyprian, named after Saint Cyprian, a Christian bishop of Carthage who documented its horrors. Modern scholars speculate that this plague may have been caused by hemorrhagic fever, possibly a form of Ebola-like virus, a particularly deadly strain of influenza. Whatever its true nature, the Plague of Cyprian struck with a ferocity that left the Roman world reeling, pushing an empire already on the brink to the edge of collapse. The origins of the Plague of Cyprian can be traced to Ethiopia, from where it spread northward through Egypt, reaching the thriving port city of Carthage before making its way to Rome. The disease moved swiftly along trade routes and military encampments, exploiting the same interconnectedness that had once been Rome's strength. Saint Cyprian's writings provide a harrowing account of the plague's symptoms: a scorching fever that felt like fire in the bones, vomiting of blood that stained the floors, severe diarrhea that left victims too weak to stand, and bloodshot eyes that gave the afflicted a haunting, otherworldly appearance. Cyprian wrote, "The body seems to dissolve from within, as if death itself walks the earth, claiming souls without mercy." At its peak, the plague killed tens of thousands daily across the empire. In Carthage, entire districts were wiped out, their inhabitants either dead or fled. In Rome, the streets became open morgues, piled high with bodies, as the living feared to venture out even to bury their dead. The scale of the devastation was unimaginable. Imagine walking through the once bustling Forum of Rome, now a desolate wasteland where the stench of death hangs heavy in the air. The grand temples, once filled with worshippers offering sacrifices to Jupiter and Juno, now stand empty, their priests either dead or hiding in fear. Families barricade themselves in their homes, praying that the plague will pass them by. But the disease shows no mercy. Neighbors turn against each other, accusing one another of bringing the curse upon the city. Some believe the gods have abandoned Rome, while others whisper that the Christians, a growing sect often blamed for defying the old gods, are to blame for the calamity. In this atmosphere of terror and suspicion, the social fabric of Rome begins to unravel. A poignant story from the time, recorded in fragmented accounts, tells of Marcellus, a wealthy merchant from Alexandria. Marcellus had built a prosperous life trading grain between Egypt and Rome, amassing a fortune that allowed him to live in a grand villa overlooking the Nile. But when the plague of Cyprian struck, his world collapsed. First, his wife fell ill, her body racked with fever and her lips stained with blood as she vomited uncontrollably. Within days, she was gone. Marcellus barely had time to mourn before his two children, a boy and a girl, began showing the same symptoms. Desperate, he sought out every healer in the city, offering his entire fortune for a cure, but none could save them. One by one, his children died in his arms, their small bodies too frail to withstand the disease. Then his elderly mother, the last of his family, succumbed as well. Overwhelmed by grief and fear, Marcellus abandoned his home and fled to the mountains, hoping to escape the plague's reach. But fate was cruel. On the journey, he too contracted the disease, dying alone on a desolate hillside, his body left to the elements. Marcellus's story reflects the utter helplessness of the Romans in the face of this relentless scourge. The plague of Cyprian did more than claim lives it, shook the very foundations of Roman belief and society. For centuries, the Romans had placed their faith in the gods of the pantheon: Jupiter, Mars, and Venus, offering sacrifices and holding lavish festivals to ensure divine favor. But as the plague raged on, killing indiscriminately, many began to question whether the gods had forsaken them. Temples that once thrived with activity fell silent, their altars stained not with the blood of sacrificial animals, but with the despair of a people who felt abandoned. In this spiritual vacuum, a new faith began to take root: Christianity. The rise of Christianity during the plague of Cyprian marked a turning point in Roman history. Unlike their pagan neighbors, many Christians refused to flee from the sick, instead staying to care for the afflicted, even at great personal risk. They buried the dead when others would not, and their acts of compassion won them converts among a population desperate for hope. Saint Cyprian, in his writings, described the plague as a trial from God, a test of faith that separated the righteous from the wicked. For many Romans, however, the plague was a sign that the old gods no longer held sway. Christianity offered a message of salvation and eternal life, a stark contrast to the fatalism of Roman paganism, and its growth during this crisis laid the groundwork for its eventual dominance in the empire. The Plague of Cyprian raged for nearly 2 decades, claiming millions of lives and leaving the empire in tatters. It exacerbated the political instability of the 3rd century, a period already marked by the crisis of the 3rd century, during which emperors rose and fell with alarming frequency. The empire's population dwindled, its economy faltered, and its borders became increasingly vulnerable to barbarian incursions. Yet, amidst the darkness, the seeds of a new Rome were being sown, a Rome that would one day embrace Christianity as its guiding light, forever altering the course of Western civilization. The Antonine Plague and the Plague of Cyprian were not mere footnotes in the history of Rome. They were seismic events that left deep, lasting scars on the empire's body and soul. These devastating outbreaks, along with numerous smaller epidemics, reshaped the Roman world in ways that reverberated for centuries, influencing its demographics, economy, military, and even its spiritual landscape. As the empire staggered under the weight of these invisible enemies, the cracks in its once unshakable foundation began to widen, setting the stage for its eventual decline. Yet, amidst the darkness, these plagues also sparked transformations that would redefine Rome and leave a legacy that echoes into the modern era. One of the most immediate and profound impacts of the plagues was demographic collapse. The Antonine Plague alone is estimated to have killed between 5 and 10 million people, roughly 10% of the empire's population over its nearly 2-decade rampage. The Plague of Cyprian, striking a century later, compounded this loss, claiming millions more. By the end of the 3rd century, some historians estimate that the empire's population had been halved. Entire towns and villages were abandoned, their fields left fallow and their streets silent. In cities like Rome and Alexandria, the once thriving urban centers became shadows of their former selves, with neighborhoods deserted and marketplaces eerily quiet. This drastic reduction in population had a ripple effect across every aspect of Roman life, creating a domino effect that would prove nearly impossible to reverse. The economic consequences were catastrophic. With the labor force decimated, agriculture, the backbone of the Roman economy, ground to a halt. Fields that once produced abundant harvests of wheat, olives, and grapes lay untended, as farmers succumbed to disease or fled to escape its reach. In the provinces, regions like Egypt, known as the breadbasket of Rome for their grain production, struggled to meet the empire's demands, leading to food shortages in the capital. Trade, another pillar of Roman prosperity, also suffered. Merchants, fearing infection, abandoned their routes along the Silk Road and the Mediterranean, causing a sharp decline in the flow of goods like silk, spices, and precious metals. Prices for basic necessities skyrocketed, plunging the poor into starvation, while the elite hoarded resources in a desperate bid for survival. The empire's tax base, already strained by constant military campaigns, shrank dramatically, leaving the government with fewer resources to maintain its vast infrastructure or defend its borders. Militarily, the plagues dealt a crippling blow to Rome's legions, the very force that had secured its dominance for centuries. The Antonine Plague decimated entire units, with some legions losing up to 1/3 of their soldiers. The Plague of Cyprian further eroded military strength, leaving the empire vulnerable at a time when external threats were growing. Germanic tribes along the northern frontiers and the Sassanid Empire in the east seized the opportunity to press their advantage, launching raids and invasions that the depleted Roman armies struggled to repel. The crisis of the 3rd century A period of political instability that overlapped with the Plague of Cyprian exacerbated these challenges, as emperors rose and fell in rapid succession, often assassinated by their own troops. The plagues, by weakening the military and destabilizing the empire, played a significant role in paving the way for the eventual fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 AD. But the plague's impact was not solely destructive. They also catalyzed profound social and spiritual changes. The Plague of Cyprian, in particular, marked a turning point in the rise of Christianity. As traditional Roman religion failed to provide answers or solace in the face of such widespread suffering, many turned to the new faith. Christians, inspired by their belief in charity and eternal life, distinguished themselves by caring for the sick and burying the dead, even at great personal risk. Their compassion won converts among a population desperate for hope, and their willingness to face death without fear stood in stark contrast to the fatalism of pagan Rome. By the time Emperor Constantine legalized Christianity in 313 AD with the Edict of Milan, the faith had gained a foothold that would eventually see it become the empire's official religion by the end of the 4th century. The plagues, in a sense, acted as a catalyst for this monumental shift, reshaping the spiritual landscape of the Western world for millennia to come. The plagues also forced the Romans to confront the fragility of their way of life, leading to incremental improvements in public health. While the concept of germs was centuries away, the repeated outbreaks prompted some practical changes. Cities began to invest more in sanitation, improving waste disposal and water management to reduce the conditions that fostered disease. Physicians like Galen, whose observations during the Antonine Plague laid the groundwork for later medical advancements, inspired future generations to study the human body more closely. Though these efforts were rudimentary by modern standards, they reflected a growing awareness that health and hygiene were critical to the empire's survival, a lesson that would influence the development of public health systems in later civilizations. A small but poignant story from the aftermath of the Plague of Cyprian offers a glimmer of hope amid the devastation. Lucius, a farmer from a small village in Gaul, survived the plague after losing his entire family. Determined to rebuild, he moved to a remote plot of land, far from the crowded cities where disease had thrived. There, he cultivated wheat and raised livestock, teaching his new family formed through a second marriage the importance of cleanliness and self-sufficiency. Lucius's story, though simple, reflects the resilience of the human spirit, a testament to the ability of individuals to adapt and endure even in the face of unimaginable loss. The plagues of Rome, while devastating, were not the end of the empire. They were a crucible that tested its strength and forced it to evolve. They exposed the vulnerabilities of a globalized world, where connectivity could bring both prosperity and peril. They also highlighted the power of faith and compassion to unite people in times of crisis, laying the foundation for a new Rome that would rise from the ashes. As we reflect on these ancient pandemics, we find echoes of our own struggles, reminding us that the lessons of history are as timeless as the eternal city itself. The plagues of ancient Rome were far more than dark chapters in history. They were defining moments that tested the limits of human endurance. The Antonine Plague and the Plague of Cyprian revealed the fragility of even the mightiest empire, showing how invisible enemies could bring a world of legions and emperors to its knees. Yet, through the devastation, Rome demonstrated a remarkable capacity for resilience. The rise of Christianity, the seeds of public health reform, and the enduring spirit of individuals like Lucius remind us that even in the darkest times, humanity finds ways to adapt, rebuild, and hope. These ancient pandemics hold a mirror to our own world. They teach us that global connectivity, while a source of prosperity, can also be a conduit for peril. They underscore the importance of unity, knowledge, and compassion in overcoming crises, lessons that remain as vital today as they were 2 millennia ago. The story of Rome's plagues is a stark reminder that history is not just a record of the past, but a guide for the future. Thank you for joining us on this journey through Plagues of Rome, the empire's greatest fear. If this story of survival and transformation has captivated you, please like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to explore more untold stories from the ancient world. Let's keep uncovering the past together.